My current occupation is one that I've actually invented. I work as what's called a personal, family, organizational, and community historian. And I'm doing this through a small business, a small proprietorship called Vintage Histories and Stories, which I founded last year. So essentially what I'm doing is using the training that I gained from my English and history background, as well as teaching. I should mention I have a teaching degree as well. So I'm combining those skills to create essentially a small business that's suited to my background. With Vintage Histories and Stories, my responsibilities really revolve around managing projects, and they're usually contract based, or sometimes I describe them as commission based. And so it really has to do with managing these histories that I'm doing for people, families, organizations, and communities. Right now, for instance, I'm writing the history of a local organization in the form of a book. So that includes managing my relations with the company or the organization that I'm working with. It includes managing research and the writing process, and also assisting with publishing, printing, editing. Most of my work is based around text, so I do generally produce books. So I'm involved in all the steps that are related to sort of publishing a book. My interest in history goes back to high school, grade 9 actually. I think I've probably been interested in history since I was even a child, but it was really learning about, I think, the Second World War that really hooked me on history, and I continued taking courses right through high school, and so doing a degree in history was pretty natural for me. It's really about following a passion. Well, some of the skills that I learned here at McMaster that are useful to me in working with Vintage Histories and Stories certainly include research skills, obviously. And with my work I do not just secondary but a lot of primary research, not just going through archives as well, but creating documents through oral history. Now, oral history is something I didn't study at Mac, but I definitely credit Mac with really developing my research skills. Certainly critical thinking is key as well, and creative thinking. From my English degree, I think I really developed a good sense for crafting and working with narrative, for putting a story together, and for really understanding, I think, human beings, and just because that's really what history is about, is, you know, study of human beings. Some of the extracurricular things I did at Mac that I think have been helpful for me in terms of starting my business and, you know, being successful at it. Probably writing for the Silhouette and for the McMaster Quarterly. It was called Between the Lines at the time. So I did a lot of article writing, sort of journalistic style, but also a bit more journal style. And those are really good experiences in terms of writing for an audience. After my degree, it became possible to start to get involved in actual academic research, which I did for about 3 years. I should mention as well that I did a master's degree here at McMaster, so that was also important for opening that door. But it was in about 2006 to 2009 that I worked as a historical researcher on 4 different book projects. They were in the area, the main one was in the area of legal history, but I also did some work on contemporary political issues, global politics, and let's see, some Canadian history from the 19th century as well. But there was a lot of legal history that I worked on. Another thing I did too after leaving McMaster was finishing a Bachelor of Education at the University of Toronto, so I also worked as a teacher for a few years. Well, the history degree, traditionally, the sorts of career paths, I guess one has to decide whether one wants to work directly with history or not. I mean, I know that a lot of people will use the degree, they'll transfer it into other areas. I know a person right now, for example, who did a master's in history at McMaster and is now working in the financial sector. So I think the kinds of skills that are developed in a history degree in particular, but I think probably also English, are certainly transferable. If you're looking to work directly in the history field, people have tended to go into teaching, museums work, archive work, journalism, law, sometimes politics as well. I think there's quite a range, but those are some of the ones that have been really popular. It's important to point out, though, that the job market has really changed. I mean, 10 years ago, moving into some of those careers was maybe we might even have to go back 15 years. It was fairly easy, say teaching or law. We know now actually that a lot of those careers are really oversubscribed. So I think it's important for someone who's going into history or even English to really recognize that the job market has changed, and that I think there may be a need to take a bit more of a creative approach to how you apply your degree, or to be patient, because moving into some of these careers takes longer than it used to. I think it's really important to build a strong relationship with your professors and your tutors. Don't take that for granted. Make sure you actually go in and get to know them and share the problems you're struggling with in your work with them. Some other things I could recommend, certainly volunteering is important, networking is important. One thing I would recommend is starting to actually make contact with people who are working in the fields you're interested in. There's something called an information interview that you can do with people in the professions or different vocations. And that's what I would really recommend, is get out there and make appointments with people who are doing the things you can see yourself doing. And that could include people in more conventional professions like, say, journalism or teaching. But you'd probably also want to look out for people who've taken a bit more of a personal or entrepreneurial approach, and consider going to do an informational interview with them. These can be done, you can learn a lot just from a 10 to 20 minute session, and you could even just have a phone interview with people. You might also consider job shadowing if you're really trying to get to know what a career is like. One of the things I could say to sort of sum up is I think it's really important as you're finishing your education and moving into your work life to consider finding a mentor and to really building a relationship with a mentor, someone who's a bit older, who's a little bit wiser, who's got a lot of experience in the areas that you want to move into. I say really reach out and start to build a mentoring relationship with that person. Imagine it lasting for several years. In my own experience, I've found that I've had several mentors over the years, but I think it's really important to have someone, not necessarily your employer, not necessarily a past professor, not necessarily a relative, someone who's a bit removed from all of that, but who cares deeply about your destiny as a person and how you can grow in their profession.